Today we're going to have a look at ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. This is an Australian-based organisation that in their own words claims to be an independent, non-partisan think tank that produces expert and timely advice for Australia's strategic and defence leaders. I'm going to dig a little deeper into this claim of independence and uncover some interesting facts, as well as look at a couple of their most recent reports in regards to China. So if you want to learn more, stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the Barrett channel. If you've not been here before, my name is Lee and I run this channel with my son Ollie. Together we cover topics of food and travel, technology and also opinion pieces. So there is something for everyone. Okay, ASPI, let's get stuck in and take a look. As I said at the start, it's an Australian-based think tank. Its executive director since 2012 is Peter Jennings, the former Deputy Secretary for Strategy in the Defence Department. And during his time at ASPI has written a number of articles, including Australia's options for pushing back against Beijing, and Australia needs more links with democracies and fewer ties with China. So it's pretty clear that this guy is not a pro-China kind of guy. And ASPI is responsible for pushing out much of the anti-China narrative in Australia, and its reports often get referenced by Western mainstream media like the BBC, CNN, in Australia, the USA and in the UK when writing their anti-China stories. It pumps out a one-sided pro-American view of the world. This was said by Bob Carr, who's the former Premier of New South Wales, and the ex-ambassador to China, Jeff Raby, said, "I see it as very much the architect of the China threat theory in Australia." Now, one of the biggest red flags for me concerning ASPI is this claim that they are an independent think tank, and clearly this is not the case. They seem to have a very pro-US Five Eyes anti-China narrative, and a quick look at their funding might explain why. So first of all, let's have a look at their 2019-2020 funding report from their website. First, the section on overseas funding. You can see that apart from a few small amounts from Israel, Japan and the Netherlands, a bulk of their funding comes from the UK and the USA. Funding from those two countries alone totals $1.8 million. Now let's move on to funding from the private sector defence related organisations. Here we can see, including the sponsor, Lockheed Martin and Raytheon among others. Both of these companies are large American weapons manufacturers. The total funding from these organisations amounts to almost $370,000, and on top of this they receive $4 million from the Australian Department of Defence, and clearly there is a conflict of interests. And I now want to look at other sources of funding they receive. This is funding from the private sector organisations, and looking through the list there seems to be a lot of tech companies. Among others is Cisco Systems, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Oracle and Twitter. And I find this interesting because I would imagine these companies would expect something in return for their donations, just like when these same US companies give money to senators in the USA. It's called lobbying, but many people would call it influencing policy and decisions. I certainly would. So this brings me on to the two most recent reports that ASPI have released. The first titled Trigger Warning and the second titled Strange Bedfellows on Xinjiang. So let's first have a look at Trigger Warning. So this report talks about ASPI thinks that pro-CPC influencers are engaged in a coordinated campaign of propaganda together with Chinese government officials, Chinese media and Chinese nationalist internet trolls in order to undermine critical reporting by international media, research institutes and NGOs. And what I find most funny about that sense is that ASPI think international media carry out critical reporting on the Xinjiang issue. ASPI also say that pro-CPC influencers are pushing information from niche alternative websites. By this they mean the grey zone, I guess, which have blown numerous holes in much of the information that ASPI and people like Adrian Zenz puts out. Even in the opening paragraphs of this report, ASPI use the words allegations and infer, meaning they have no actual evidence of what they are saying. These same words are then used in a number of other places throughout the report. The report then goes on to say how this apparent coordinated response, targeting the BBC in particular, is being spread on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook, and was broadly based around three prominent narratives. The first one, that the BBC spreads disinformation, is biased against China. Well, you really don't need to be a genius to see that this is actually true. I think the BBC are very biased. Secondly, the BBC's domestic audience think that it is biased and cannot be trusted. Again, there are many polls by prominent UK polling companies that support this view. And three, that the BBC's reporting on China is instigated by foreign actors and intelligence agencies. Now, although not relating to China specifically, there are leaks and documents, some that were recently uncovered by the Grey Zone, that do actually show the BBC has in fact colluded with intelligence agencies in the past. The report then goes on to talk about how these comments, videos, etc. are amplified across a pro-CPC Twitter network. And on page 9 it even features tweets from us, the Barrett channel. Strangely, one of the tweets they chose was a retweet of an original tweet from a well-known comedy actor, John Cleese, who obviously has a similar view of the BBC as I do. Now on to the second, more recent report. This is titled Strange Bedfellows on Xinjiang and was published on the ASP website on the 30th of March 2021. And again talks about how the CPC, pro-CPC online actors and fringe media seek to shape and influence international perceptions on the narrative of Xinjiang. Okay, let's just stop for a minute and I explain what I think they mean by that. So, the CPC, the Chinese government, that's an easy one. Next, pro-CCP online actors. These are people on social media who do not agree with the narrative of either ASPI or the Western countries attacking China with unsubstantiated and unverified claims. And finally, fringe media. These are websites like the Grey Zone who, through investigative journalism, find holes in and debunk the claims of organisations like ASPI and mainstream media like the BBC, CNN, etc. Again, in their opening paragraph, they use the word alleged, meaning they have no credible evidence to back up what they are saying about what is happening in Xinjiang. The report then goes on to say that since early 2020, there has been a stark increase in social media used by the Chinese media. Well, maybe, just maybe, this is around the same time that there was an increase in attacks against China. I think it's ridiculous that the US, UK and EU think they can constantly attack China, much of the time with unsubstantiated claims, and that China should have no right to defend itself or refute any of the claims levelled against it. The West have even resorted to the term wolf warrior to describe Chinese diplomats who respond to these attacks. In total, the report is 28 pages long, and the only conclusion I personally can draw from the report is that people retweet and comment on other tweets that they either agree or disagree with. They even provide nice little charts and tables showing who has linked tweets and how many times and how many people have liked certain tweets about Xinjiang. There's even a fancy graph on page 19 showing how often Hua Chunyin has shared tweets from the Grey Zone. And it's really interesting that in the whole 28 pages of the report, not once does ASPI challenge anything that the Grey Zone has reported. And I think from that you can really draw your own conclusions. However, what does concern me is the reason I think these reports are being published and very quickly picked up by mainstream media. And I think what is happening here is the groundwork is being laid for the US government and or US tech companies that run these social media platforms to start censoring and suppressing tweets that are produced by journalists that go against the Western narrative on China, regardless of whether that information is factual or not. The report suggests that we are coordinating with the Chinese government in order to spread disinformation and influence the West. And we've seen this in the past with Russia. how the USA suggests that disinformation campaigns from other countries are a danger to US democracy and must be suppressed. The reality is that they just don't want their population to hear an alternative and maybe more factual narrative. And finally, I'd just like to point out something that I think is quite obvious. Liking a tweet, retweeting someone else, or commenting on a tweet certainly does not mean that you are colluding with them, as ASPI are suggesting. So that brings me to the end of this video. I'd like to hear what your opinion is on these reports, so please leave your comments on this video. I'll leave links to all the information I have referenced here so you can go and read it for yourself. I'd really like to thank you for spending your time today listening to what I have to say. I hope that you found it interesting. There's a lot of work involved in bringing you these videos, and we really appreciate your support. We are also hoping to purchase some new camera equipment soon, so if you would like to donate to helping us get that, it will be very much appreciated. The ways in which you can support us are in the description below, and I'll pop some info on the screen now. Anyway, thank you all once again, and as always, for now, take care.